Zero G here. Welcome to this video on how the NVIDIA 4070 GPU is not actually overpriced.
Here's general economic inflation. It's affecting food and housing, water, electricity, gas, fuels, transportation. Everything has skyrocketed up. These figures here are from the International Monetary Fund, which is actual economists, as opposed to what I've seen some other YouTubers claim, which is that, oh, well, inflation shouldn't affect GPU prices and blah, blah, blah. And they quote some tweet. No, you're wrong. Inflation is affecting everything. Because if NVIDIA is going to make a graphics card, they have to pay employees and they have to pay for shipping and they have to pay for services and they have to pay for electricity. All the costs that go into making that card are now like twice as expensive as they were before. In the tech industry, especially, that price of skilled labor has also gone up. Let's look at what milk prices have done. I'm using 2016 as the baseline because that's when the 1070 and the 1080 came out. In 2016, in the UK, milk was 43 pence per pint. I just love these quaint British units of measurement, by the way. And then in 2023, that same pint of milk is 70 pence. Now, if you just took this for a second and said, hey, this GPU was $430 in 2016, and now a GPU with that same name is $700, people would be throwing a huge fit. But that's just what the prices are doing right now because of inflation. That's what inflation means, is that prices go higher, and it's not just milk. Look at car prices. In 2016, the base model Honda Civic was $11,550. In 2023, that price has basically doubled to $23,450. And that's if you can find one where the dealer hasn't marked it up another 2 or 3K. Now, I think that there was a sort of a mistake a lot of people have made in their thinking, which is that they seem to have gotten under the false belief that the prices were only high because of the pandemic. But no, the pandemic just accelerated the existing forces of inflation that were already there. But you can see the trend was already going up, and the pandemic just caused a spike because the government's pumped so much money into the economy to bail us out of the pandemic. And every time you dump a whole bunch of currency into the market, now there's more currency, so every unit of currency is worth less than it was before because there's now more currency. So if there's $1,000 in circulation, every dollar is going to be worth a lot more than if there's $1 million in circulation. It's just basic economics. Furthermore, we have the problem that the chip shortage isn't over yet. It wasn't just because of the pandemic. People had this mentality that, well, when Ethereum goes to proof of stake, all of a sudden nobody's going to be buying GPUs anymore. Everyone was saying, oh, they're going to become cheap again. However, all those GPUs that were being bought by crypto miners are now being bought by Fortune 500 companies that are building these big AI farms. So when you're buying a GPU from NVIDIA, NVIDIA is printing out that GPU on the same exact wafers that it's printing out its enterprise level GPUs on. That wafer has a cost associated with it, and TSMC sets the price, not NVIDIA. And TSMC for that 300 millimeter die on a 5 nanometer wafer is $16,000. Now, there's a formula that can tell you roughly how many chips you can get onto that wafer, and they can use chip binning to get better yields out of it. But TSMC's yield is about 80%. So what does this actually mean for NVIDIA? If you go back to like the GeForce 10 series, which came out in 2016 on the Pascal architecture, you had the 1080 and the 1070 launching with the same transistor count. And then a year later, you had a speed bump where the 1080 went up to 12 billion, but the 1070 stayed at 7.2. And at that point in time, you had Samsung and TSMC fabs both making those chips. There really wasn't a bottleneck. Chip technologies were basically ancient at 14 nanometers and 16 nanometer process, and it was dirt cheap. So they could retail the 1070 for $379 and still turn a profit off of those. Now, for some reason, people expect that, well, the 4070 should cost $379 or $479. Well, $600 is just too damn high. So the GeForce 40 series, released in 2023 with the Ada Lovelace architecture, now has the 4080 with 45.9 billion transistors and the 4070 and 4070 Ti with 35.8. And a lot of people said, well, you know, that the 4070 Ti, which was originally going to be released as a 4080, that shouldn't have been a 4080. It has to be the 4070 Ti, which really, I didn't understand that, because if you look back at this lineup, the 1080 and 1070 both had the same transistor count. So really, the 4080 with the 45.9 billion transistors should have been the 4090, and the 4070 Ti 12 gigabyte should have been the 4080, and then the 4070 also with 35.8 billion. If we were gonna be the same as it was back then, we should hold off on having a Ti model until the like mid-cycle speed bump, because that's what Ti has been for the last few years. And yet, for whatever reason, gamers were like, oh, like throwing this big fit about like how NVIDIA must name their products or we're gonna throw a fit. You know, it's like, God, like what is wrong with people? Seriously, like they could literally call these things whatever the hell they want, and the products are so much better than what they were back in the day. I mean, it's hard to even say they're the same category of product at all, really. I mean, it's like if you bought a Honda Civic in 2023 and it came with like a V16 engine that goes from 0 to 60 in 1 second and gets 95 miles to the gallon, that would basically be the equivalent. Getting that for twice the price of the original Honda Civic from 5 years ago, that's a pretty fucking good deal. But, you know, we just, with Moore's Law, we just sort of have this expectation that prices will just stay the same magically. We'll never have to pay more than what the price was like back in the day. And it's like, that's just unrealistic. You know, there's a global economy out there, the forces of which are going to dictate that just will not happen, no matter who wants it. Okay, so let's look at this $599 price of the 4070. All right, what is NVIDIA's actual cost for a 4070? Well, the RTX 4070 die is 294.5 square millimeters. So for the 4070, we have 188 dies per wafer, maximum, theoretical maximum, assuming that these are square dies. So I don't know if there really are square dies or not. And obviously, usually there's going to be some boundary around the dies so they can cut it, you know, so you're not going to get 188, but that's the theoretical maximum, right? Now, TSMC's average yield is about 80%. So that gives us 150 4070s off of that. That means the cost per GPU chip, just for the GPU chip alone, $107. Rough estimate. We're just spitballing here. It's $107. Now we also factor in GDDR6X VRAM, the latest and greatest VRAM from Micron. It's their best VRAM. I looked up those parts on Mouser.com, which is, you can go and actually buy the same exact memory chips almost that NVIDIA buys, except the ones NVIDIA gets are the best of the best that Micron makes. They may not even be ones that are available to the public to buy yet, because Micron can only make them fast enough for NVIDIA. So rough estimate, those are probably about 180 bucks for 12 gigs of that memory, gigabytes. When you look it up on their site, it's listing it in gigabits, but you need 96 gigabits of that memory to get 12 gigabytes. Okay, so that's about $180 for the VRAM. Now, we're already at $287 for the cost of the card, just for the VRAM and the chip itself, before we've even manufactured it into a graphics card, before we've added a fan or a heat sink or a board or all the other microcontrollers that has to go on there to make it into an actual card that can go in your computer. And before we've packaged it into a box and that regulatory approvals for all the different countries, homologation, distributing it, marketing it, creating the drivers and software, advertising it, and then of course the cost of ongoing support and warranty administration and all those things. Now, it's easy to see that all that other stuff is probably going to account for another $100 of cost on top of the pretty much $300 we're already at. So let's say that the cost of that GPU to NVIDIA, if they're selling their brand of the card, is $400. And that's probably a lowball estimate. Okay, that's probably less than what it actually is. But let's say it's $400. Okay, if their initial retail price is $599, think about it like this. If I'm the retailer, If I'm Newegg.com or whoever, and I'm selling the card to you for $5.99, I have to make something off of it. I'm not just giving it to you at my cost. So usually a retailer wants to make 15% because once you've calculated in the credit card fees of 2, 3, 4, 5% and all the handling of returns, running your website, you're basically hardly breaking even. Believe me, I know because I've done e-commerce. It's brutal. So that means that NVIDIA's cost to the retailers is probably, let's say, $5.29. So if I'm the retailer, let's say I make $80 selling you that card, right? Because otherwise it's just not worth it for me to sell it to you. Like, why would I sell it to you if I'm only making $40? That's nothing. NVIDIA's margin on the card at launch is $120. That's a decent profit margin, but that's not raking us over the coals. That's not taking gamers out to the woodshed and vampiring us of all of our mortal life force. That's just them being a business trying to make some money. I mean, you have to have some profit on there. We cannot reasonably expect NVIDIA not to be making 20, 30% profit at launch on these cards. Like, that's not raking us over the coals. It really just isn't. And whether you think the value proposition offered by this new card for $5.99 makes it worth it for you to upgrade to it compared to what else is out there on the market, that's a valid question. And that's what I would leave to the other much more knowledgeable YouTubers out there to compare and look at the benchmarks and say, well, which games are you going to play on it? What settings are you going to run? Crazily ironic is that NVIDIA actually took steps to keep some of their cards priced under inflation. Because remember the milk that went from 43 pence to 70 pence and the Honda Civic that doubled in price? They're not asking $800 for a 4070 when that would be what it would be based on just inflation. But EVGA cited NVIDIA's own price ceilings for the 40 series as one of the reasons that they exited the market. Because see, EVGA throughout the whole turmoil of the 3090 Ti and all that, when they were the one that everybody wanted to buy, they were pretty sick and tired of watching scalpers make all the profit on their product when they're struggling to pay their employees and all these costs are going up and inflation's going up. Everyone wants a raise to cover inflation. All of the cost of all your parts and everything is skyrocketing. And yet NVIDIA is telling you you have to sell it below this amount. So how are you supposed to make any money? How's that supposed to make EVGA any money? Why would they keep doing it if they can't make money doing it? They're a company. They have to be able to make money doing it, especially because they're based in the US. They have US employees and they had an extremely generous card upgrade program and all those things that they did that nobody else did. The best support in the industry, the best quality, all that costs something. So they wanted to be able to charge whatever they could for their cards. They wanted to be able to charge $2,500 for a 4090 for the Win 3 or $22.99 or $21.99. But the point is, EVGA wanted to set their own prices rather than just watch scalpers make all the profit on their stuff. Whether you think $1999 is more than a top-end graphics card should cost is really irrelevant. The fact is, if graphic cards are going to cost $19.99, $18.99, $17.99, and I'm the company that has better support and makes the best version of that card, I want my card to cost more than the competition's card by at least enough extra where I'm not losing money by investing more into R&D and investing more into making a good quality product and investing more into having good support and a trade-in program and all those things that EVGA was doing that cost extra money. I don't blame them at all for exiting the market when you have NVIDIA saying you can't sell your card for any more than Asus and MSI and Gigabyte are going to sell theirs for. We can probably expect prices to just keep going up. We know, for example, that TSMC's 3nm node that NVIDIA is using for the 50 series is going to be $20,000 a wafer instead of 16. And the problem of TSMC being the bottleneck, that problem is not going away either, because what makes TSMC so special is the fact that they have EUV lithography machines made by ASML, which is a Dutch company that produces the only kind of lithography lithography machines you can get that are capable of producing 5 nanometer and 3 nanometer process. Intel acquired some of those machines from ASML, but however, the US has blocked ASML from selling EUV lithography machines to Chinese chip factories, which would really be the thing that would open the floodgates in terms of cheap GPUs. Now, why would the US do that? The reason is because it is primarily US investments by the Department of Defense and Apple and some other industry partners that enabled ASML to produce EUV lithography machines. The US does not want to just let China have that technology that they weren't involved in investing in creating in the first place, especially because the US is currently in a race with China to generalized AI, because whoever gets really good AI first wins. That is the new nuclear arms race. Having AI ahead of the other guys is the thing that's going to define who becomes the primary superpower of the 21st century. Now, China has publicly come out and said they want to get there first. They're trying to do it by 2030. But the problem is they don't have the chip fabrication facilities to be able to produce the kind of AI data farms that I mentioned earlier, the kind that NVIDIA sells to big companies. And the US doesn't want them to get that. Now, because that chip fab is in Taiwan and China thinks Taiwan is part of China, China is threatening to invade Taiwan. And the US is saying, we're going to stop you from invading Taiwan. Well, this presents a very precarious situation because if China does invade Taiwan, it's very unlikely that the United States would allow Taiwan to be taken with TSMC's factory intact. In other words, if China invades Taiwan, the chip shortage of 2020 is going to look like the good old days. There just won't be chips anymore for a while. I mean, if that happens, it's game over because that's probably going to be nuclear war if it does. But what's the good news? The good news is that the cabal of gaming websites, YouTube channels, and PC Master Race influencers that have been trying so hard to make NVIDIA seem like the bad guy and to make the 4070 seem like it's a bad deal and it shouldn't be a 70 series and all the stuff you've been told, it's all bullshit. The truth is that the 4070 has a number of really awesome technical advantages that once games actually support those features, which many of them already do, it will be a proper generational leap of performance over the 3080. For example, the Ada Lovelace architecture has something called FP8 Mode. And what this does is it cuts the precision of the floating point numbers in half from 16-bit for the tensor cores. It basically doubles your performance without much of a downside, just in the same way that FP16 performance is typically twice as fast on a GPU as FP32. FP8 is twice again as fast. And for a lot of use cases, you won't need 16 bits of precision. Further, DLSS 3 isn't just bells and whistles. It really is a transformative game technology. My experience with it has been that Microsoft Flight Simulator is finally playable at 4K. Whatever your experiences were with DLSS 1 on a 2080 or 2090, forget about all that. This is a completely different ballgame. It's a much more polished technology now. I don't think NVIDIA was wrong to double down on that. And I do think that the cabal of PC building, gamer, YouTube channels like Gamers Nexus and Jay's 2 Cents and so on that don't use in-game footage in their reviews of graphics cards and just show you a bunch of bar graphs, a lot of them based on really outdated games, I don't think that those channels are really giving you a proper review of why you should buy that card or not. Any review of a graphics card ought to include in-game footage of the reviewer actually playing games on a real system with that real GPU, and then trying the different settings and comparing how the performance is with those different settings. And then you can compare those same settings to how it runs on your current computer, and you can go, oh yeah, that looks really good, or nah, I'll wait for the next one. And so I highly recommend that you check out the excellent demo video by Shadow7. See the link in the description. But he goes through a bunch of games like Fortnite, Grand Theft Auto 5, Rainbow Six Siege, Forza Horizon 5, Hogwarts Legacy, and a number of others, showing how it runs without ray tracing and with ray tracing, and without DLSS 3 and with DLSS 3. And it's really night and day. I don't know how you can watch that video and then come away from it going, well, DLSS 3 is just smoke and mirrors and like that's not real performance. It's like, yeah, it is real performance. Ada Lovelace cards also have more level 2 cache and much faster VRAM. The 4070 in particular, when you're dealing with a card with less VRAM, it's even more important to have that big extra level 2 cache. This is very similar to what AMD did with the Infinity cache for their CPUs, because anything that's in a level 2 cache is in a much faster form of memory that does not place that extra load on your VRAM. So if I can increase my level 2 cache by 6 times, going from a 3080 to a 4070, that is 6 times less often that the card will have to access the VRAM for that same stuff. And that means there's less load being placed upon the VRAM. And furthermore, the VRAM is now GDDR6X, which is at least 12.5% faster than the VRAM of the prior generation card. So not only are we gaining extra bandwidth on the RAM from not having to use it as much, because now we have better level 2 cache. So when people look at the memory bandwidth of a 4070 and it's less than a 3080, is it hurting you? And as it turns out, this bigger level 2 cache and the faster VRAM compensates for that enough that even for games that don't take advantage of DLSS 3 or the new technologies that Ada Lovelace architecture offers, you're still getting rasterization performance equivalent to a 3080 in a card that's only 200 watts. And that's a huge deal. People aren't making a big enough deal out of that. It's drawing 150 watts less than like a 3080 was drawing. And that's going to allow your whole system to run cooler and quieter. If you're overclocking your CPU and trying to milk the most performance you can out of an aging system, that's huge. It's like, think about how much extra heat your CPU cooler has to take care of because the GPU adds a lot of heat inside your case. So if you're trying to get the most performance or the quietest ambient noise level, then having a 200 watt card is a major advantage from a GPU standpoint. The other thing is that all this extra AI horsepower is not just going to be for graphics going forwards. For example, this paper that came from Stanford University and Google demonstrates how those same GPU AI cores could be leveraged to provide realistic human-like behavior for AI NPCs in a game.